So, hello and welcome everybody to our panel discussion on German dialects and how to treat the topic of dialects in German lessons as a foreign language. We are welcoming 4 of our teachers at the Deutsch Center International that are Judy, Marion, Sabrina and Maren. And we will start the discussion by just saying a couple of words about ourselves and then giving you a little bit of an overview about dialects and what they actually are and how and why they are relevant for learning German in the classroom. And then there will be plenty of opportunity to discuss all sorts of aspects that we will come across. So we're very much looking forward to a lively discussion on that. I'll just quickly start with myself. So my name is Antje and I am the principal of the Deutsch Center International. I have founded the Deutsch Center in 2013 as a place in Manchester to learn German, but not only to learn the language, but also to learn the language in the context of culture. So from the very beginning, it was very important to us to have events which now through the pandemic turned virtual as well. So we have quite a few online Zoom events, but we also have in-person events happening in Manchester regularly. Marion, do you want to say a couple of words about yourself?
Yes, hi everybody. So my name is Marion and I studied German linguistics and literature and as well as French and history of art at the University of Tübingen. And then I moved to Manchester in 2004 to do my PhD in history of art. And I taught at the university for 11 years and I've also been teaching at Deutsch Center since June last year. Hi. Oh yeah, and just in the context of dialects, I'm from Swabian Bavaria or Bavarian Swabia. So it's sort of a region between Munich and Stuttgart where we speak a mix of Bavarian and Swabian.
Okay, thank you. Maren.
Yes, hello. So I'm Maren. I'm a former intern, or I was a former intern at the Deutsch Center International, hosting several events. And yeah, I was invited to talk about the different dialects in Germany. And I'm really excited for this. And so I'm from East Frisia. This is a part or a region next to the Netherlands and at the North Sea coast, and we speak flat German, or most of us speak flat German. The younger generation doesn't, but yeah, it's a nice little corner of Germany.
Okay, thanks. Sabrina.
Yes, hello everyone. So Sabrina, that's me. I'm from Switzerland originally, so that also means I'm going to be covering the Swiss aspect of the Swiss variety possibly. And I moved to the UK 2010, I think, and I've been teaching German as a foreign language since 2012, mainly at universities, but also I think actually I started in 2016, no, actually earlier with the Deutsch Center, I'm not so sure, but I'm teaching there now as well, so I have quite a few different teaching jobs. And obviously I teach standard German, but also have some experience of teaching Swiss German, which is a thing, so we can actually learn Swiss German as a language, so to say. So yeah, that's a few things about me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And Judy.
Hi everybody, my name is Judy and I work as a teacher in Manchester in a secondary school. I moved to Manchester in 2017 after completing my studies in English, geography and German as a foreign language. I don't speak a dialect as such, as I grew up in the Rhineland. However, when I went to university, I came across some really strong dialects, especially Saarländisch, which is spoken in the very southwest of Germany. And if people speak in this Saarländisch, I could not understand a word. So that's how I became interested in learning more about dialects.
Okay, thanks. So now you know basically all about us, well, everything that's relevant for now. And we would like to know a little bit about you. So we've prepared a poll for you to just click on. Oh, it was open already. So you've filled it in already. Ha. I can see that we've got nearly half of you are from Manchester. We've got, can everybody see that? Oh, no, that was just, I only put that, sorry, that was only for the teachers. I'm sorry. Let's open the poll again. Can I start that again? Can you see the poll on the screen?
We can't see it yet.
Relaunch poll. Okay, can you see the poll on the screen, everybody? Okay, so where are you logging in from? And are you from Manchester, somewhere else in the UK, any other country in Europe, or somewhere else in the world? And what describes your situation best? You learn German, you teach German, or you're a native speaker? And where have you come across German dialects before? In a German-speaking country? In your own country when you were speaking with German speakers? Anywhere on holiday abroad when you were speaking with German speakers, or in the classroom, or not at all? So we've got three people who haven't managed to. Should I just share the results with you? Three people who still want to take part in the poll, just for you to get an idea. Okay, let's just share the results for you. So we've got half of you are from Manchester, and we've got people from anywhere in the UK. Do you want to quickly say hello, say where you're logging in from?
Oh, I think I'm in Manchester. I'm in Stockport. But...
Yeah. Yeah, that's Greater Manchester. I should have specified Greater Manchester. So who's logging in from another European country? That's just one person. So hello, welcome. Where?
Hello. Hi, I'm from Bulgaria.
Hello.
Hello. Do you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you well. Well,
Yeah.
welcome, Maria.
I'm logging from Bulgaria, Sofia, and the moment I'm working as a German teacher, and yeah, it would be interesting for me to
great.
hear more about the German dialects.
Nice to have you here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We've got two people who logged in from another country in the world. You want to quickly say hello as well?
Hi, I'm logging in from Chicago. I'm actually from Manchester, but I work and teach German in Chicago.
Great. That's the local connection as well. And we have Jane from Texas. So welcome, everybody. It's great that we're truly international now. And we've got plenty of people learning German, so half of you learning and half of you teaching. I've got one native speaker as well. And yes, so we've got all different settings where you have come across different dialects before. So we'll definitely come back to that last one. But we'll start with our teachers giving you a bit of an overview in a presentation. So I'll leave the field to Marion.
Okay, so we just wanted to start by giving you a bit of an overview of some of the relevant terms and categories we're going to come across tonight. And I think the picture that's going to emerge is that German is, there's no such thing as the German language. We're talking about sort of a really heterogeneous field, and there are different varieties and variations. And first of all, there's Standard German, Standard Deutsch, and that is basically German as it is codified or standardized for common use. And it's perhaps important to say that we don't actually have an official body in Germany, such as the Académie Française in France, that kind of governs the German language. So it's just German as it is officially written, and therefore it is also often called Schriftdeutsch, written German, and somewhat wrongly called High German. I think Maren will say more about High German and Low German, etc. So what is dialect then? It's a regional variety of the German language in our case, and it's distinguished by features of vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. So all the different linguistic characteristics of the language are impacted when we speak dialects. So it's a purely geographic definition. And by contrast, if we talk about accents, we talk about pronunciation only and maybe intonation, sort of the sentence melody, as well as the pronunciation of vocabulary is different when we speak with a foreign accent or as speaking a second language. And then we've got three categories: regiolect, sociolect, and ethnolect. And we're going to have slides, a bit more detailed slides about these in a second. But the main thing to keep in mind about all these categories, I think, is that they're not set in stone. They're constantly debated and contested among linguists, but also speakers. And they're just sort of somewhat artificial to help us discuss the topic. But the boundaries are sort of fluid. And it just goes to show that language changes all the time. So if I could have the next slide, please, Tabea. So most of the time when we talk about dialects, what we actually mean is regiolects. And that's a sort of a category in between Standard German and a pure dialect. And actually the majority of German speakers speak some form of regiolect, about 80%. And so it's basically the everyday language spoken by German-speaking people across Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and all the other countries where German is an official language, such as Belgium, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, etc. And it's often also spoken by the younger generation as a result of dialect loss. So often the sort of pure dialect is not passed down to the younger generation. So we tend to speak sort of a mix of standard German and dialect. And something that is sort of often debated and contested, is it perceived as somewhat more personable, more kind of down to earth, warmer? Probably not across all the different varieties. So there's some that are more popular, some are less popular according to surveys. Maybe we can discuss that as well. So examples would be, instead of saying ich habe, ich bin, we would say Icke in Berlin or Ich in the Rhineland in Hessen. Or you have a few examples as well, such as Knöllchen instead of Strafzettel. And these are examples that also then get taken up by the standard language and that are in the official dictionary. Yeah, okay, can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. Then, and the next category we'd like to discuss is sociolects. And so now we're coming away from the purely geographical definition. And sociolects are usually defined by the speaker's social background, such as age, gender, race, class, or profession. And sort of a well-known or prominent example would be youth language or youth slang. And I don't know if you followed the Youth Word of the Year debates 2021. I think cringe was the youth word of the year last year. So often they're also anglicized anglicisms. And it could be professional jargon, such as Beamtendeutsch, the German spoken by civil servants, Juristendeutsch, German spoken by lawyers. So often these varieties are then characterized by nominal phrases or huge, long compound nouns, for instance, in jurisdiction. And another example would be Ruhrpottdeutsch or Ruhrdeutsch, spoken by the working class in the Ruhr region of Germany. An example there would be Malochen instead of Arbeiten, for instance. Yeah, next slide is fine, thank you. And the last category we want to focus on is ethnolects. And so now we have different varieties spoken by ethnic minorities within the country. And often people who are immigrants and who speak several languages at home have then a multilingual background, and these sort of heritage languages then are being taken over into the German. And it's usually a very creative, experimental kind of language. And an example of that is Kiezdeutsch. It's often also termed Türkensprache, or used to be also termed Kanaksprach, but it's now sort of a bit debated because it could have kind of racist or xenophobic undertones. So Kiezdeutsch is usually sort of a more accepted official term. And it's spoken by often a young generation of immigrants in urban centers such as Berlin and Cologne, Hamburg, Frankfurt. And it's characterized by simplified grammar. So often we have an omission of conjugation. So you would say, ich habe keinen Hunger instead of ich habe keinen Hunger. Or people would skip prepositions and articles and say ich muss mal Toilette instead of ich muss mal auf die Toilette, or lass mal Kino gehen, ich frag meine Schwester. So it's sort of a mix, also loan words from Arabic and Turkish, for instance. So yeah, just a few of the categories we might be coming across later in the discussion as well. And I'm handing over to Maren, who will talk more about dialects proper.
Sorry, Maren, before you start, if you have any questions that come up in between, just put them into the chat, and we will, so you don't forget them, and we will come back to your questions at the end of the presentation. Sorry, Maren, you carry on.
Yeah, I hope I can give a few good insights into the dialects in Germany. So after hearing some interesting information about regiolects, sociolects, and ethnolects, we will now come to dialects in Germany. We will go on a brief tour through the history of German dialects and then look at them in more detail. So until the end of the Middle Ages, professors, the clergy, and humanists spoke Latin, and only the folk would speak German dialects. And with Luther's standard translation of the Bible, the differences in the language came to the surface. So people realized, oh, the language or the dialect we speak is not spoken elsewhere in Germany. But when did it all start? Germanic tribes were the reason for the language variance. These were the Alemannen, Bajuwaren, Franken, Friesen, Sachsen, and Thüringer. Soon you will recognize some of them when we talk about the different dialects in detail. And these language differences were separated into Germanic and Indo-Germanic languages. We had two vowel shifts in history. During the first vowel shift, the Germanic language stressed the first syllable. The Indo-Germanic stressed any syllable. The B, D, and G became P, T, and K. So, for example, Aga, for example, became Acker, like field. With the second vowel shift between 600 and 800 after Christ, regional languages were divided into High German and Low German. So silent occlusives or mute sounds like P, T, and K became softer when following a vowel. The T became SS. For example, when they said Etan, this became Essen, to eat. The P became FF, for example, Opern, for often or open, and K became CH, from makon to machen, to do. In the flat German languages, however, old and hard sounds are still in use. In the north, we say dat, wat, warte, or depending on where you speak or where you live in the northern part of Germany, water. So pretty close to English. And in the south, they say das, was, and Wasser. So now to the dialects. Here's an overview of the dialects in Germany. I put colors behind each dialect, so it's easier for you to see how many dialects are geographically in the south, the central, and north of Germany. As you can see, there are only 4 dialects in the north, a few in the central of Germany, and most dialects are in the south. Sadly, these are a bit too many dialects to dive into all of them in detail. So I picked some dialects with the help of the other speakers, asking what could we look at which dialects. I have a few examples without audio examples. Please forgive me for not saying these words, as I'm not able to pronounce some of these words. I did it once, and people from, I think Swabia laughed at me. they said, oh, that sounds so cute when you try to say these words. So the first one is Bayerisch. It's spoken in Bavaria mostly. And the characteristics of Bayerisch are diphthongs like I turn into Ohr. So the A sounds in Katze, cat, or Hase, rabbit, are rounded. In words like Katzal and La, I'm not quite sure if I pronounce it right, are brighter. Yeah, so now we have some audio examples. We can't hear them. I think.
Yeah, it seems that we can't really hear the audio examples. Let's see if Tabea can do something about it. If not, we'll
just continue and then.
Yeah, we will just continue, and we'll send the PowerPoint presentation and the recording around at the end of yeah, probably in the next couple of days after the talk. So you will have access to all of them.
Yeah, so as you can see in the vocabs, that most of these words are like completely different and written also. Yeah, just imagine how you would say them. It could be funny. Yeah, then going on to Berlinerisch, to the next slide. Great, thank you. So in Berlin, people don't, there's no R sound in Berlinerisch, except for the double R, and R is an initial sound. This means that R disappears, for example, in the name Richard. In Garten or Garten, the R turns into a CH sound. In Uhr, the R becomes an A, and the G turns into a J, as you can see above in Garten, for garden. And the G as a final sound turns into a CH. So a lot of CH, and yeah, pretty interesting. Going on to Kölsch. Yes, this was quite interesting. When I had a look at all the grammar points, there were a lot of rules. So I just picked a few of these rules, and afterwards you can have a look at further details. So Kölsch is spoken in Cologne, and the final consonants are hardened. In some words, a double G is pronounced like a single G, but it can also be pronounced like a K in others. So it really depends on the word. Is the G at the beginning of a word, it turns into a J. Is the G at the end after light vowels, it turns into a CH. Yes, these were just really a few rules in this dialect. Very complex, and we will now go on to Ostfriesisch, East Frisian. And yes, so I'm more familiar with this one. As I said in the introduction, Yeah, this is the dialect I grew up listening to. Sadly not speaking, but that would be an interesting point for the discussion later on. I was surprised to find out that the East Frisian alphabet has 39 letters, whereas the High German has 24. These extra letters, however, are not used when it comes to newspaper articles or when it's written. Actually, it really just helps with pronunciation. The V can vary between a B and a W. The R is always rolling. And yes, as it is with Kölsch, there are many more rules, and these were a few I picked from 266 pages of East Frisian grammar. So yes, this is also, some people say East Frisian is more like an own language. And yes, that's also something we can discuss about later on. We will now go on to Sächsisch. Yes. So according to surveys, sorry, Antje, the least popular dialect in Germany seems to be Sächsisch. So in Sächsisch, Saxon, the CH turns into a sh, as well as the suffix ig. P, T, and K become softer. P becomes a B, T becomes a D, and K becomes a G. I don't know, Antje, can you read this nice sentence here?
The Weichen besiegen die Harten, which means that die Weichen besiegen die Harten, the soft ones vanquish the. Oh, it's everything's written. I don't even need to translate.
Yeah, so thank you for that.
Yeah, so you just made me read that just because you said it's the most unpopular, and now I'm just making myself very unpopular by pronouncing
No, no. I didn't mean it like this.
Oh. Do you want me to give the audio examples then? Because we can't play them.
Please.
Yeah. Okay,
that would be awesome.
Wir können ditchen. So, ich ditch meinen Keks in den Tee. Mern ist so, wir müssen uns beeilen. Nischel. Nischel means head, so die Kopfschmerzen, headache would be Hudelei mit dem Nischel. Diction is schmollen. And the last one, Klitsche, Dorfen nirgendwo in the middle of nowhere. I did not actually know that. So I think even in the area of Saxony, there might be varieties in certain parts. So yeah, I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, such as Blembe, for example, like a very light coffee, not strong enough. And yes, so these were just a few examples from dialects, about dialects in Germany. And I will hand over to Sabrina. Is Sabrina the next? Yes.
Yes, I think I can see a flag here that I should recognize. Yes, exactly. I hope you can hear me. I think I muted myself. I realize my voice is still not quite back to normal after all this COVID business, but yes, I hope I'm going to lose my voice. Yeah, Schweiz, Switzerland. I often feel there's a lot of confusion about the language situation in Switzerland, rightly so, because it's not an easy situation, I don't think. So Switzerland, a very small country, as we probably all know, but there's 4 languages, 4 national languages, as it says as well on this infographic that I found in Switzerland, which is obviously German, the biggest language, French in the west, Italian in the south, and Romansh in the southeast of Switzerland. And you can see the percentage distribution. So you can really see Romansh as a very, very minority language actually in the southeast, in the valleys, in the mountains. There's different varieties of Romansh as well. So Romansh itself has 5 varieties. It makes it a very, very small language. And actually jumping ahead to the last point, English and Portuguese being the most widely spoken foreign languages in Switzerland. I think there's more Portuguese speakers in Switzerland than Romansh speakers, actually. It's definitely a minority language, but something Switzerland wants to cling on to, I think. Not as much as they maybe could. So there's this, the next 2 points on the slide, the difference between Amtssprache and Landessprache. So the four of the languages are the Landessprachen, so the national languages. They're recognized as that, but only German, French, and Italian are actually Amtssprachen, so official languages, which means all the official documents in Switzerland are available in all of these 3 languages. So they have obviously a much stronger position within the whole bureaucracy of Switzerland. Whereas Romansh is just kind of kept as like a bit of a funny, cute, special language. There's not as much protection for it. But I digress a little bit. Obviously, we'll mainly focus on German today. But just to give you an overview as well where everything is. And obviously, it's quite a complex situation already. And then within German, or Swiss German, it's getting quite messy as well. So I think we can move to the next slide to give you a bit of an idea of how German works in Switzerland, or how that is as well. So generally there's the Schweizer Hochdeutsch. So we've seen Hochdeutsch before as the standard, the Schriftsprache, the written standard that we have for German generally. And there is a smaller variety of this, which is Schweizer Hochdeutsch. So this is the officially recognized written form of German used in Switzerland and Liechtenstein as well. So we kind of share that, as opposed to Liechtenstein, a very small country, but they would be using generally the same standard in written as is used in Switzerland. And it does vary from the standard German that you would be using in probably, well, definitely Germany, I assume. Austria is yet a different story. It differs in vocabulary. There's a lot of Helvetismen, and there's a few further down. There is also morphology, syntax, spelling, and pronunciation. So actually, it varies in quite a lot of areas, Schweizer Hochdeutsch. So we're not even talking about Swiss German as such. This is the standard German written in Switzerland. It already has quite a few varieties or kind of differences as well. I find it's quite interesting because I, for example, work as a translator as well. And often when we do, this is for Switzerland, the only thing that is done is a spelling change. So the SZ, the letter, well, the scharfes S does not exist in Switzerland. Usually this is just removed and replaced by SS, and this is then Schweizer Hochdeutsch, which is obviously not quite true. So there are more differences that if you kind of really look at it, but they're on a very detailed level in a way, so there you need to really kind of change the text quite dramatically if you really want to adapt it. So definitely vocabulary on these examples here, you can see boulet, pneu, and perron, or perron, as some examples that are used in Switzerland. French words, as you can probably recognize. So for the chicken, it's poulet, and the wheel, no, it's not even a wheel, the thing you have on your wheel, which would be the pneu, and the perron is the place where you wait for your train. Obviously Bahnsteig, maybe more familiar words. So I rarely use these kind of standard German words. I would always use perron, unless I teach, then obviously I'm teaching the standard words. Then parkieren, grillieren, this ieren ending for words like to park and grill or barbecue. So it's park and grillen in standard German, but then parkieren and grillieren. And I think the German speakers from Germany always find it's quite funny when we use this, and I wasn't really aware of these differences until I got laughed at. I was like, oh, you don't say parkieren. Oh, right, okay, so this is then Swiss specific, so it's one of those things. The last thing I only learned very recently is anerkennen. Anerkennen, to recognize something, is not separable in Switzerland, but separable in Germany, and I presume it also in Austria. So that's definitely a very kind of detailed or a very grammatical level then, where we actually don't separate words, so we do separate words or verbs generally. And then gender as well, we say das E-Mail and das SMS in Switzerland, but it's die E-Mail, die SMS in Germany and Austria. And plural as well, I didn't know this, Spargel, the asparagus, the plural of that I didn't know in Germany is just Spargel apparently, but in Switzerland is die Spargeln with an N at the end and Perke for parks. So definitely kind of a lot of detailed differences as well. And there's an example here in the picture, which sounded really good for me. So I saw this and I was like, yeah, what's the problem with that? So fehlbare werden für Umtriebe behaftet sounds like a good threat to me as a rule, or kind of where I'm not allowed to park. But that maybe for German speakers here in the group, I'm not sure, maybe you'll feel a bit like, what are you actually saying here? In Bundesdeutsch, you can see underneath, it would be something like zuwiderhandeln, die haften für die Kosten des entstehenden Aufwands. So we have the fehlbare as a word, and Umtriebe, so it's definitely quite a lot of difference there. Actually, obviously also shorter, so maybe that's the reason why they chose that. But you can really see this is actually just the standard German spelled or written in Switzerland and Liechtenstein, which is already quite a bit of a difference. And the last thing I want to talk about is obviously the Schweizerdeutsch as well. So I want to give you a bit of a dive into this as well. So I think we can move on to the next slide now. So I can tell you a bit about that. Yeah, Schweizerdeutsch then, what is this? So this is now just the German, then of course, how do people speak? So the Schweizer Hochdeutsch presumably is what's written in Switzerland, whereas Schweizerdeutsch is what is spoken. So Schweizerdeutsch in the title, maybe you've also seen this spelled differently, and that obviously leads to the first problem. There's no spelling for Schweizerdeutsch. There's various varieties that are spoken, so you might see this spelled quite differently. So this is the collection of Alemannic dialects. So the Alemannic tribes were in Switzerland, they're the ones who lived in Switzerland, and they're kind of where the language is still there, or the dialects are there. And it's definitely a collection. So well, every valley, every village has their own dialect, I would say. And I think if you grow up there, you can hear where someone's from. I suppose that's kind of true for many countries, but it's really, really varied. There's many, many varieties, even within a very small German-speaking part of Switzerland. Within that area of a lot of different Schweizerdeutsch variety. And it's the one used in everyday life. So it's not a class distinction, is not anything to do with formality, politeness or anything. It is really just used for everything. So we use it in everyday life and it's spoken. Whereas written should be the Schweizer Hochdeutsch. So as we've seen before, that's the written language. However, Schweizerdeutsch is definitely used now as well for writing in informal communications or emails, SMS or kind of text messages. It is used, however, everyone just spells in whichever way they want, because it's not a written language, so people just make up as they go along. And usually you need to read it out loud to be able to understand what's going on, because when you see it written, it's a bit like, don't know. But as soon as you read it out loud, you know what's actually what it says. And yeah, there's great varieties. There's actually, especially in the southwest of Switzerland, in valleys, Valais, I don't know if anyone's ever been on holiday there. Generally, that's not understood in Switzerland. So this dialect is very difficult even for the Swiss to understand. So that's one thing that I find quite interesting. Even in such a small area, it's really difficult to understand each other, actually. The last 2 points, then maybe raising the question that we can maybe also discuss, what is a language, what is a dialect? Most Swiss, I think it's fair to say that a lot of Swiss perceive Standard German as a foreign language. So it's something that you learn in school. It's something that you hear on the news, on the radio, or not on the radio, on the TV, I suppose a lot more, something you read, but it's like a foreign language to you. It's not how you feel, you can express your feelings. Whereas Swiss German is where you feel at home, and it's the language where you feel that's your first language. But is it a language? That's the question. There are language courses now offered for Swiss German, and this is obviously, I find, a very interesting area, because people moving to Switzerland, how do they communicate with the locals? If the locals really don't like this Standard German, it makes sense to learn Swiss German, but obviously, is it a language that we can teach, or is it something that is maybe quite difficult to acquire if you don't grow up with it? So that obviously leads to very interesting questions. I think I have one more slide to tell you a little bit more about the differences in Swiss German. There is an audio clip here as well, which we're not going to play. I think it's about 3 minutes long, which just gives you an idea what it sounds like, what Swiss German sounds like if you want to listen to it. Lots of changes again here. How does it differ in terms of pronunciation? I only looked at the pronunciation. The K becomes a sound and a very strong sound. There's no soft sound in Switzerland, so we have Chuchi, very nice. The very famous Chuchi-Kästli, so the kitchen cupboard. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but that's usually the one where people make a lot of fun of the Swiss. The ST, there's no st sound, it's always a st. You've already seen this for other varieties, so lustig, for funny. The I becomes a long E sound, so rather than einladen, to invite is I-laden. So we don't have this I sound. Wein is V as well, so we have definitely that quite often. The Oi sound, as in heute, is a Ü sound, hüt. Then the ow sound it turns into a oo sound, moose for the mouse. Then a long oo turns into a ua, as in huasta for coughing or the cough. The long u sound is a ua sound as well, and I put this on. I really wanted to have this on because I find it quite interesting. The thing you eat for breakfast might be muesli, and in Switzerland this would be muesli, because muesli is actually a little mouse. It's always quite funny when Germans tell me, oh, I had muesli for breakfast. I always think like, what? You're eating mice for breakfast? So muesli along u sound is a little mouse, whereas the muesli is what is eaten in Switzerland for breakfast. The Bircher muesli, for example. Along E is a ia, so fieber, rather than fever for fever. And the E is kind of an A sound, lasa, instead of lesen for reading. So there's just a few. I think there might even be other pronunciation differences, but I just thought to give you a bit of an idea, maybe to see what this looks like. And again, also spelled out. This is kind of how you might be able to write it, but obviously others might be spelling it differently as well, because as I said, there's not really a way of kind of a standardized spelling for it at all. The R is always rolled. I didn't say this, of course. The R is always rolled. There's no, well, actually, some dialects don't roll the R, so then we can't really say this is a thing that is always true. But yeah, so much for Swiss German. I think I'll hand over from here. I think that was my last slide. So I hope maybe there's some questions we can also discuss later. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sabrina. We're going to continue now to look at dialects within the classroom. This section might be a little bit more relevant to teachers, but I hope that learners will also find it interesting. So for this purpose, we will look at a study of Basler and Spiekermann, who conducted some research. So they gave questionnaires to 151 students and 15 teachers of German. So they looked at a range of questions, such as, are students aware of dialects in Switzerland, Austria, and Germany? And 70% of the students said that they are aware that there are regional varieties between Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. Interestingly, also, 86% of the teachers said that they are aware of these differences. However, 6.7% also said that they were not aware at all, or they were not sure about this. So this shows that perhaps there is also an area of training needed for some teachers, or that there is not so much of an awareness within their studies about regional dialects. Moving on to the next slide, please. Okay, so then these two researchers also asked students and teachers whether they think it's important to be able to speak, sprechen, write, schreiben, understand, hören, verstehen, and read, lesen, verstehen, German dialects. Okay, so the researchers gave them options to rate from 0 to 4, whereas 0 would be they don't want to develop this competency at all. 1 would be they want to have a satisfactory understanding. 2 would be good. 3 would be very good, and 4 would be perfect. So if they said 4, they would like to have a perfect ability to write German dialects. Okay. So our Schüler, which is our students, then rated the competency of listening as the most important one. So they are more ambitious in developing a listening competency, so being able to comprehend dialects of German. Learners are not so bothered about being able to write the dialect. Okay, so writing or schreiben is the lowest, as you can see on here. And if you compare learners and teachers, you can see that the learners are more interested in learning about dialects than the teachers are about teaching it. So the teachers don't think it's that important to teach about dialects. Overall, 80% of the learners think it's important or very important to be able to adjust to dialects. So when they meet a speaker, they would like to be able to understand that speaker of German wherever they're from. Okay, going on to the next slide. So we already now established that most learners want to study some German dialects or dialects. As teachers, we all want to prepare our learners well for their exams, and many of our colleagues have already conducted and prepared students recently, maybe for some speaking exams, if you're in the UK, if you're teaching in the UK, or if you're teaching abroad, perhaps at some other point you've been preparing learners for their exams. So in order to find out a little bit more about what the exam boards say about dialects, we contacted the AQA exam board, which is an exam board we have here in the UK and is commonly used in UK schools. So the UK examiner said, I'm quoting, "Where speaking tests are undertaken in a dialect different to the standard version of a language, the dialect must be comprehensible by a speaker of the standard language." So this shows that if speaking exams are conducted, there is an acceptance that German is not a homogeneous entity and that there are many varieties which could be spoken by the candidate or student. There is no expectation for candidates to speak standard German or Hochdeutsch when they're conducting the exam. And as long as they can be understood, any dialect is appreciated and encouraged. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So let's look at some teaching opportunities for German dialects in our classroom. I'm very appreciative that we are maybe teaching different exam boards, and especially if you're in the US, you might be on an international language curriculum. So we'll just see if hopefully this is interesting. So the Common European Framework for Languages, the CEFR, has given some recommendations on sociolinguistic variations, including dialect and accent. It recommends developing a relatively neutral register up to approximately the B1 level, okay, so intermediate level. And they define register as the register that native speakers are likely to use towards and expect of foreigners. Okay, so in schools, with most colleagues that I've spoken to, they said that up to the end of secondary school, they focus on teaching standard German because they want to prepare learners. We have to prepare learners for the exams, don't we? And we want to establish a clear and shared understanding of standard grammar. However, then moving on to a more advanced level, perhaps at A level, regional dialects can be discussed. And in that context, it might be perhaps an opportunity to look at some lexical varieties, so differences in vocabulary between different regions. And if you're teaching in the UK, the topic festivals and traditions might lend itself towards introducing these regional or dialects or regional varieties. So perhaps you could look at the topic of Carnival and how Carnival is celebrated in different parts of Germany and maybe Switzerland, and also how Carnival is called. So in southwest in Baden, we call it Fastnacht. It's called Fasching in Bavaria, Carnival in the Rhineland, Cologne, and Fasnacht in Mainz, where I'm from. Okay, so that might be an opportunity. Or you could look at some traditions in the Alps, and you could use that as an opportunity to introduce some dialects or regional varieties. Moving on to the next slide. So in summary, after reflecting on the varieties of German, we can conclude that Standard German is an artificial construct and that this construct mainly exists in written language. Although textbooks for secondary school learners mainly focus on Standard German, we recognize that there's a lack of teaching materials on regional dialects. We also all appreciate that teaching about regional dialects at a more advanced level is very important. And learners of German are interested in learning about these regional dialects and dialects. And it would be really nice to find out more whether you're interested and whether you've come across regional dialects and dialects in your learning of German so far. Teaching about this has a motivational effect on them, and it also strengthens their intercultural competencies, as well as preparing them for the real world of German, which is, as we found out, messy. Okay, so I'll pass over to Antje for the next part.
Okay, thank you all four of you. You had a lot of input now. We gave you an overview of what dialects are and how we can define them. We gave you a broad overview of the dialects spoken in Germany. Then we focused on Switzerland, and then finally the relevance for dialects in the classroom. So these are 4 different aspects, and now it's basically over to you as our participants for this event. Do you have any questions or any comments, anything that you would like to share with the group? We're quite a small group, so if you would like to raise your hand and speak rather than put it into the chat, you're very welcome to do that. James.
Hello, I haven't met many of you before. I've met Maren before. I've sort of wandered all around Germany, but I've ended up being a fan and member of SC Freiburg football team, and so I stood on the Nordtribune in Freiburg and learned what I thought was Bardisch, but apparently there is no such dialect as Bardisch. It's sort of there's sort of Alemannic in various forms, but it's really interesting going to Freiburg, because from Freiburg you can go up into the Schwarzwald, or you can go west into Alsace, or south to Basel and Switzerland. And you can see like linguistic changes are very subtle, but they happen gradually, but you notice changes gradually. And people from Basel come to Freiburg to watch football, and you can understand them. But if I go to further into Switzerland, to Bern or Zurich, it's utterly impossible to understand Bernschweiz or the Zurichschweiz, and you cannot even count. I don't even recognize numbers in Swiss. It's amazing. I was in the football stadium in Bern, and they gave the team out, and I couldn't even recognize the numbers of the shirts that they were putting out. So I just find it really interesting, and I'm really puzzled by Basel as a sort of multilingual city, because is everyone bilingual there? Can they speak French and German? It's very difficult to know whether you're speaking to a French speaker or a German speaker when you're actually in Basel, because they all seem to be bilingual. But and it's sort of potluck which language they chirp up with first when you're speaking to them. And yeah, if you want to say anything about Elsässisch, because I've been to Stuttgart and Colmar and spoken standard German. But I can, if you hear someone speak Elsässisch, you can actually understand it. It's an Alemannic German language, I assume, and yeah. So if you want to speak about Alemannic and Freiburg and Swiss and the Swiss border, and feel free. Yeah, and I can't understand any. If my friends in Freiburg start speaking quickly in Badisch, I can't understand, and the only words I know are swear words about Swabians and Stuttgart fans. So I know Schwab and Schwabble and Salschwab, but that I wouldn't call a Swabian by any of those terms, you know. Except when drunk in a football game.
I wouldn't know, because I don't really know much about football. But I think the continuum, I find that a very interesting. Obviously that's how language is, because we always think it's kind of this one block of language, but obviously it's very much a continuum. So this swap, so it's a continuum at the same time. There's really a border. So I think Basel is very interesting for that. Obviously Basel, the dialect in Basel is probably more similar to Freiburg than, as you said, Bern. Nice, obviously completely well observed, but it's still, you realize the moment you cross the border. I mean, architecture as well and everything, but you just kind of instantly know where the person's from, even though it is a continuum. And I find it's very interesting that maybe then the borders are still important, and we're still kind of belonging to a certain nationality and kind of a linguistic community as well. So I find that definitely a very interesting aspect of language and how it evolves. And in terms of what language you speak, I find that interesting as well. I was on a teacher training course in Schwäbisch Gmünd, I think, so kind of in that area. Well, Baden, I think Baden-Württemberg, that would be. I'm not very good with German geography. And speaking to the people there, I felt like, well, should I was speaking standard German to them, obviously with my Swiss accent. And I thought, well, they sound like me. I should just speak Swiss German to them. Would that be better? Would we understand each other? So it's just kind of in this continuum, you suddenly feel like, or constant, I'm like, should I speak Swiss German to the people? Do they understand this? Or should I speak my standard German with a Swiss accent? Would that be, it feels awkward. It's very interesting, like how do we what we speak when we're kind of in this continuum, and should we still speak dialect or should we speak standard? I find that a very interesting question for myself whenever I'm in that area as well, definitely.
That does lead to the question that both Sabrina, you and Maren brought up, both with the north and the south ends of the German-speaking landscape. I mean, Platt and or Ostfriesisch and Schweizerdeutsch are so far away from each other, and both of you raised the question: what is it? What is a language, and what is a dialect? And any thoughts from the audience about that? Otherwise, I'll let the two of you talk about that.
I don't.
Yeah, James.
No, can I just say, somewhere over there, I've got some. They're called Krimi books. I have Krimi books, and when you read a Schwarzwald Krimi, it's in what I would call standard German, and I can sort of understand it. But then if the detective or someone is interviewing someone, it tends to drop into dialect. So you get these little chunks of dialect which you have to struggle really hard to translate or understand. It's the vernacular. If they're trying to interview someone, that person is using their everyday language of the street in Freiburg. It's actually quite interesting to see how the language changes. But I don't know if that's a theme in German literature that they use. Is there a literature German is what standard German, so you can get like standard German books with like language conversations thrown in dialect for the sake of authenticity, I assume.
Yeah, I'm talking about, because I just recently found Dürrenmatt, just kind of talking about literature as well. He apparently, I'm not an expert on Dürrenmatt, but obviously der Besuch der alten Dame might be familiar for people who teach German as well. But apparently he used a lot of Helvetismen as well. And I think for him it was the color. It was like giving authenticity. And obviously if a play is in Switzerland, it doesn't make sense to use certain words because no one would use it there. So obviously, again, to use it as an artistic thing, but obviously to show, yeah, we don't speak like this. And I think certain things still feel odd to me to say when I teach, I speak standard, and I'm now saying things that I probably never would say when I speak German normally, or kind of when I would speak to friends. So it's definitely something where we adapt, where we just have to kind of obviously, to make it either more standard or make it more dialect. So definitely we have this ability as well. And I suppose it shows real knowledge of the language if you can do this, and if you really know which variety to use as well. Obviously, as a native, you should hopefully be able to do that. But it just shows, I think it's also, there's a trend more to use it more and more again. I think there was this, actually in Switzerland, definitely. So my mother's generation, it was like, no, we speak standard all the time. We're not, because Swiss German is inferior. And if you want to be speaking properly, you speak standard. And I think my generation now very much like to show identity, and we are Swiss and we have our own variety. We use Swiss German a lot more, like this, writing it in text messages, in emails. It's obviously nothing that is standard, but we do it because it's kind of our identity. So very much so. I think that's not just in Switzerland. I would say that's something that we can observe. We kind of go back to the roots and kind of want to show where we're from as well.
Marianne.
I just wanted to say about the crime fiction, James, you mentioned. It's a whole subgenre of German literature, these regional crime fiction novels, and it started, I think, in the Allgäu region, south in the mountains, and it's now spread all over Germany. But perhaps they would make interesting teaching material for students, sort of a little extract of that, where, you know, the policemen or, I don't know, speak dialect, or the local people. And another example of going in a similar direction is Tatort, if you know the sort of thriller kind of every Sunday night at 8:15 in the ARD, the public television. You have Tatort team solving a case in a different region of Germany, and local dialects are a main feature of you know, the main actors or figures. So perhaps they would make interesting teaching or learning material, talk about them, you know, at a certain level of competence, language speaking.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's funny though that in German TV, it's mainly the German productions that allow dialects. Anything that is translated or dubbed from English is usually standard German. So even if in the English original there has been they were playing with dialects, the dubbing is all in standard German. So that's a bit of a shame, but yeah, you're absolutely right, Mariam. Judy, you wanted to say something, and then it's Maren after that.
Yeah, so mine is more about teaching. So it was just a small one because we were speaking about dialects. So I thought I never had a dialect. I always thought I spoke High German or Standard German because where I grew up, all people spoke very similarly, and I only was made aware when I started teaching that I do have a slight dialect, and it made me aware when I was saying the word ich. So I would say ich habe Hunger, whereas the standard German would be ich. And only when I said ich and the learners were ich, I realized, oh no, it should be ich. So that would be an interesting question to maybe discuss as well with those of you who are teaching German. Did you, when you learn German, develop some type of dialect? Where did you learn German? I would be curious to find out a little bit more. And also, how does that work when you're teaching? Do you go into standard German? If we have an opportunity to speak about this, maybe sometime later.
Yeah, that is a really interesting question. I guess most of you who were teaching German, are you native speakers, or did you learn German in school, at university? Did you go to Germany for your semester abroad, and where did you go? How does the dialect affect your, it'll probably color your own German. So that's a really interesting question. May I get some of the teachers? Yeah, Annegret?
Yeah, hello. I'm actually from Ostfriesland, just the same as Maren. And in my teaching, I have actually given my students examples of Ostfriesisch or Plattdeutsch, and they found it really interesting because there were quite a few similarities to English because of the vowel changes and the consonant shifts at times. And they were really interested in it. However, teaching it would not be an option because the written variety is just not available for Plattdeutsch. It's just not that standardized because it just changes from one little village to the next one, how it would be pronounced and therefore how it would be written. I don't know whether Maren agrees with that, but that's what I think.
Yes, I totally agree.
Thank you.
My father speaks flat German.
Yeah.
My mother doesn't. And it's always interesting to hear his flat German, and then just 5 or 10 kilometers away, people use completely different words for the same meaning. Yeah. I don't know, Annegret, if you know the word hübgeput.
No.
Like a
oh right, okay.
Yeah, so there's always like different words, and I'm not quite sure where about you from.
Well, I'm from Emden.
Emden, yeah. So there's like parts. Krummhörner Platt, flat German is completely different to the flat German they speak in Norden or Emden or
definitely, yes.
Yeah, so you can even hear differences there, and sometimes you even have to ask, what do you mean by this, because they use different words.
Yeah, that's a brilliant example of your dialect, where you come from. You can't separate it from the culture, from the regional culture, and to bring that into the classroom and to enrich that. That's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, you definitely can't do that.
Yeah, Samuel, you were raising your hand.
Hi there. Yes, so I'm not a native speaker of German, but learned German in school, went to university, and then I spent my my semester year abroad, the whole year actually, in Chemnitz, in Sachsen. So is this where you're from as well? Okay,
That's where I'm from. Yeah.
I had a wonderful time, but actually thinking back when I've been teaching, I've in the current school I work in, sometimes I do have native speakers of German, and they do find some pronunciations that I think I've just picked up over time, just a bit funny. And it was only when you were doing the presentation I realized the ig at the end of a word I'm pronouncing as a ish sound instead of an ig sound, which other students are pronouncing. And it was just when you mentioned Nischel that just reminded me of the Kopf in the town centre, and the students were greatly delighted in the school I worked in to tell me it was the Nischel and not a Kopf. So yeah, very nice memories actually. But yes, I love trying to show the children and the students videos of people speaking in regional dialects, and I find that they find it the most interesting as well actually. Of course, it's hard to build it into a curriculum because of time limitations and assessment conditions, but you know, giving students this opportunity to look at these things is always really enriching.
Yeah, it goes back to the to what Judy was showing of the discrepancy of students really wanting to learn about it. And teachers, yeah, you are preparing students for an exam, and there's the pressure from the curriculum. So sometimes you can't really put that much priority to the dialects. But yeah, it's probably not so easy to find the balance there.
Sorry, really sorry. I just wondered very briefly, just while Sam is speaking about, you know, your teaching, because you said you're teaching in the US, is that correct?
Yes, it's a British international school, so I do teach the British curriculum, although it is in Chicago.
All right, Brill. And just kind of looking into this, you said that you are teaching the children about some dialects, and could you maybe give some examples of what topics you're using, also in what context you're teaching them? Just, I would find that interesting.
Yeah, so we teach the International Baccalaureate course here, and so as part of one of the themes, identity, I do a topic on youth language, and actually Kiezdeutsch, as it were, is maybe not the correct terminology, but the students actually really have enjoyed kind of learning about that and how it relates to immigration and migration in Germany. I found that quite a good cultural connection for students to learn about that. I've always really wanted to try and teach or learn some Swiss German as well, but I just have found it so challenging and difficult. I once worked for a shoe company for their German customer service, speaking on the phone. So German people calling me was never a problem, but as soon as I saw a Swiss number, I used to have panic and stress. And I try, when we talk about language, I talk to the students about this and the communication points, and you know, trying to be open-minded to variations.
Yeah, I think it just very briefly, because I just thought that before, it's a question, what do we teach for? Because I suppose we're teaching towards exams, which is all standard, but then the people go to the real world, and it's suddenly like, oh my God, it's the same with every language. I mean, I remember arriving in Liverpool after learning English for many years in school, and I'm just like, right, I don't know what. So it's the same thing for everything. So we just kind of focus really on the standard a lot, and then suddenly people are out there and they're like, maybe this sounds a bit different than what I heard in school. So that's a general thing, I suppose. But yeah, definitely very important to at least have some awareness. I think that's always nice. And yeah, definitely.
And I do find, as you said, Judy, in your presentation, the festivals and traditions topic really does lend itself really well to teaching regional differences in dialects and words for things like food. I find the students really love to learn the names of different types of food when we talk about things like Oktoberfest and the different things you could buy there. That really inspires them.
Yeah, did you want to comment on that, Judy? Or no?
No, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. Food is, even with our adult students, food is the number one popular topic that, yeah, if everybody has like different ideas and people want to talk about politics, people want to talk about art and culture, but food always brings everybody together. So that's a really, really good topic for, yeah, to combine with anything.
Yeah,
James, you had your
yeah.
as well.
I was just a couple of things. I was wondering because, but I say to Sabrina, in a past life, I'm really old now, but I started learning Latin and Greek when I was about 8 in a very, very old English school system, and kept on studying till about the age of 20. And then just to say, when I was really quite good as a classicist, I once had a train journey with 2 people speaking Rheto-Romansh. And if you've studied Latin for 12 years, you can actually sort of pick it up. And I don't know where the heck that came from, because I was chatting to them afterwards and they said, oh, it comes from the Lost Legion. And they said there's this myth of the Legion that wandered into the Swiss Alps and then never got out again and was stranded. But I didn't quite believe that.
In the Swiss Alps. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's very I think, is it kind of related as well to Romanian? I'm not quite sure, but it's definitely a Latin language.
I mean, I studied Latin from classical Latin, but I could read if you, like 40 years ago, if you stuck a Romanian newspaper in front of me, I could understand it. Or
definitely
not anymore. When I wanted to learn something different, I thought, well, I won't learn a Romance language because I can pick up Spanish, Italian, French quite easily because I've studied Latin. So I tried to learn German. So
all right, new challenge.
Yeah, and yeah, I like Frisian, or I'm interested in Frisian because I like reading historical novels, and I don't know what was happening in the Middle Ages, but there's sort of some historical novels suggest that Old Frisian and Middle English, Old English were quite close, because you get these stories, in the stories you get English people sailing from Yorkshire or East Anglia to Frisian ports and, well, fishing and north, and they can communicate. So at some point English sort of went off on its own way, didn't it? But is Frisian the closest linguistically to English in a sort of schema of languages? In Germanic languages?
I think that's what I learned at university. Yes, yeah, that Frisian and English are kind of the closest related. I suppose Dutch is kind of then similar there as well, but my little knowledge of Dutch, but obviously Frisian and Dutch obviously also make sense geographically, but definitely
it would definitely make sense in terms of geography, and with the sea in between. Trading by ship. It's also quite interesting, the slide that Maren had about different dialects, and you mentioned that there are only like 4 in the north, 4 main ones in the north, 4 main ones in the center, and then as we come to the south, they become more diverse and more varied. There are some I've heard that there could be like a connection between the geography, the more flat and more open it is, and the more easier to travel, the wider dialect can be used and still be understood. While if you've got mountain ranges between the next village, and the people are more separate, the smaller groups and smaller tribes speak languages that are more difficult to understand for their neighbors. So I think that might have something to do with the different numbers depending on the geography. Maren.
Yeah, so I had a look on East Frisian, Flat German, and there are roots from English, Dutch, Swedish, and Norwegian as well in this language. So when I started studying Swedish, I recognized several words because we use the same words. And coming to your point that the wider the land and the ability to travel more, I found out, like, why do people in the southern Germany speak more dialects than in the north? So there's a Professor Schmidt from the Forschungszentrum Deutscher Sprachatlas. He said that it was quite difficult to speak High German for people from the north, as the dialect was far away from the High German, both written and spoken. It was like learning a second language for them. And as soon as they learned High German, most of them didn't go to speaking flat German. So for people from the south, however, the difference between their dialect and written language was way smaller to the High German, and thus more of their dialects survived.
Oh.
So that's at least what he said. Yeah.
I agree. So
that sounds interesting. Yeah.
You know, it's easier to understand people speaking standard German in Freiburg or even a bit further north in Karlsruhe and Frankfurt than it is in the north of German. I think it's because of the softer, you know, the I don't know. It just comes across as easier and closer to what you've been taught or what you think you've learned when you've been taught standard German.
Yeah. Annegret has her hand up.
Yes, just to answer the question about the closeness between English and East Frisian again. Like, this is an example from my dark past. When I was over in England, well, lived over in England for about a couple of years, and then went over with my partner, and we spoke to my grandma, who spoke only Platt. And I had to translate between the two people and the three languages, essentially. My husband didn't speak any German at all. I just had to be the in-between all the time. And I got totally confused about who I was talking to, because some of the Platt words were just so similar, and, well, in fact, the writing was identical to the English one, that I just didn't know who I was addressing at times, because it was just constantly going forward and backward. So that's one example, how close it is. Likewise, like being from Emden, we can communicate with some of the Dutch people, like obviously not far into the Netherlands, but quite close, and we can communicate with them. And I understand quite a bit of the Dutch. So that's similarities there as well. And the other point about learning High German, when I was at school, and my schoolmates who were coming from the villages, primarily from the Krummhörn, like Maren pointed out earlier, they only spoke Platt. So they had to come to a high school in Emden, and they didn't speak High German. They had to learn that, and they had to actually learn the writing properly as well, because in their primary schools, they were taught in Platt, and their daily communication means was Platt. So there's quite, there was quite an experience for them in those days. And we sort of, you know, with townies, we kind of went, oh, listen to them, they can't speak proper German. So there is a distinct difference between High and Platt. And so like with the Dutch, you would not find that sort of communication barrier. And I think that also makes that connection about the flatter the land, the easier it is to communicate with people, because no, you don't have geographical and physical barriers for people to travel and communicate with one another. So that's my little bit anyway.
I wonder if the when we were talking about when it's a language and when it's a dialect, Annegret, you mentioned that as well. Like what is being taught in school
Yeah.
Sabrina, in your presentation, you mentioned that Schweizerdeutsch can actually be learned as a language course. There are language courses for learning Swiss German.
That would
I
also
wonder if
apply
that might be. Yeah, I wonder if that
Sorry,
might be some sort of a criteria to say
Well,
that.
I always insist that Plattdeutsch is not a dialect. To me, it's a language. It's got a completely different syntax to High German, and the vocab is different as well. And you know, the grammar rules are quite distinct. So therefore, for me, it's a language. And the fact that they can now actually be teaching Platt in primary schools again, and there's a guy in the Emsland who actually had a big part in the revival of Plattdeutsch in the area. So to me, it's a language. It's not a dialect. And when it was being mentioned that it was a dialect, I kind of sat here and go, oh, no, it's not. It's a language. It's definitely a language to me. But then that's my local patriotism, I suppose.
I find it a very interesting question. It's actually something that even in my bachelor degree, well, this is a long time ago, I was looking at Scots actually, because I find Scots is yet again an area where we're like, is this a language or is this a dialect? Can we actually, what is a language? What is a dialect? And I think it's this quote, this much quoted quote, is it like a language is a dialect with an army and a navy or something like this? So it's all about politics. It's all about giving it power, and I think that's very true. I think that it's about standardizing it. It's having like a shared standard, which is very important for languages, and this is how languages evolved into standards, I suppose. So same with English, suddenly kind of it was standardized. We had kind of something that we could teach, it's something that we could share, and I think this is the problem with dialects. Which one do we teach? I mean, I once taught a Swiss German course and I was completely lost. I was like, well, here's the book, but what they speak doesn't sound like what I speak. Obviously, I don't speak this dialect. So students got very confused. They were like, but you said this and this says this. So what is it now? It's like, well, it's both. But so it's very, very difficult if there's not like a shared variety where we can say, and this is the correct one. It's just kind of raises the whole thing. How do we teach it? How do we, which one do we learn? It's very difficult. And obviously also not being spelt, not being written. It's a completely different way of teaching as well. You're just kind of, yeah, how do you do it? So it's a very interesting question. And yeah, it's definitely, I don't think we're ever going to answer what is a language, what is a dialect. I think it will always be argued, I think, because there's so many things to take into account.
Okay, Maren, should we you're the last contribution before we wrap it up?
Oh, yeah, okay, so hopefully it's a good one. No, I just wanted to say, Annegret, I totally agree with you that flat German is a language. When I looked up what are dialects in Germany, I was also quite confused that it's actually a dialect officially, but I can agree on that. My father, when he went to school, he also just spoke flat German, Plattdeutsch. He couldn't speak High German, the standard German. So people made fun of those people who came from the farm or from the villages and said, oh, look at those stupid farmers. They can't even speak standard German. So yeah, I totally agree on that.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for contributing. Thank you for listening and showing an interest. I hope that you could take something out of the last 1.5 hours. I found it really interesting, really eye-opening as well. On even with having paid attention to the topic before, it shows again that whether we actually teach only standard German and only start introducing dialects and regional varieties later on, just an awareness that there is not only one German language, but that it is very, very dynamic across geographical areas and across different layers of society in different parts of society. Just an awareness of that is so important, that while teaching it, and it makes it come more alive. So that was our motivation for talking about this topic. We hope you liked it. We'll send sometime later this week or early next week. We'll send a follow-up email around to everybody who took part and who signed up. And hopefully we will see you again. We will have an event like that again. So sign up to our newsletter if you haven't already, and follow us on social media and keep up to date. Would be really, really nice to see you again.
Thank you for hosting it.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
And you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
John, are you just waving? Yeah, he's just waving. Stop recording here.